Hey everyone. So my novel is a horror novel, so it's like a bit of a little different vibe. I'm going to read a part that is actually about missing and murdered Indigenous women. It's not graphic, there's no violence in it, but it's about that. And the reason why I'm going to read it is because the book is set partially in an unnamed prairie city, and Toronto, and in Winnipeg last year, actually, I think he was convicted this year. They caught the third serial killer of Native women in the last about 15 years. So that's just the three they've caught, right? And there's other people also committing crimes that are not necessarily serial killers. So that's part of the content of Winnipeg, and I wanted it to be part of the sort of the atmosphere and the landscape of the book, because it's part of the atmosphere of the prairies, really. So that's what it's going to be, just so you guys know. And I'm going to read you the back, so you have a little understanding of what the story is. Dawn hasn't spoken to her brother Cody since he was sent to prison for a violent crime 7 years ago. But when Dawn's seemingly perfect life in the big city implodes, she's forced to return to her childhood home in the prairie city that still holds so much pain for her and her fractured family. Cody's released from prison with a mysterious new friend by his side, and Dawn must follow increasingly sinister leads to uncover their nefarious plans to access a dangerous supernatural network. As the lines between right and wrong blur and dissolve, Dawn reckons with trauma and violence, loss and reclamation, in an unsettling world where spirit realms entwine with the living, and where it is humans who carry out the truly monstrous acts. So her brother just got her released, and he's shown up with Tyler, the mysterious new friend, and they're driving to a restaurant to have dinner together to celebrate his release. So start reading. The drive to the restaurant is quiet. Oh, and her dad is Martin. Dawn and Martin ride together, and neither has any words for this situation. The night sky passes by the car windows, broken by the nonchalant ugliness of billboards and signs for the procession of strip malls. They pass a pizza place that has been there for Dawn's entire life and that she's never seen open or with any customers. They pass a billboard that is a photo grid of three women's faces with the word missing in garish lettering next to them and a tip line to call with any information. The picture on the right shows a girl with wet-looking curls and dark eyeliner staring defiantly out at the passing cars, the movements of the city below her. The girl went missing after a party in an apartment building downtown. How many girls have walked into parties and bars expecting a fun night or a dull one, expecting just another night out in a string of nights out, and found instead that it was their last? Found instead that someone's evil eye was settling over them from across the crowded room, from a passing car. This girl, the missing girl, was seen by several witnesses leaving the party alone, but she's not been seen by anyone since. As Martin drives them past the billboard, Dawn imagines a procession of girls stepping into the night and being made to disappear. Dawn always wonders with every new case about the person who knows. How many cashiers, baristas, and waiters have served him, unknowing? It chills her to think of a young woman handing over his change, her fingers brushing his palm and never thinking of him again. He's just another anonymous face in the line of customers. The billboard recedes into the distance, but it stays with Dawn, a ghostly afterimage of its presence. Three more disembodied faces that most people forget as soon as they've driven past, because they believe that bad things like this do not touch them. Because they tell themselves that somehow those women were different. They must have been marked in some way, even done the marking themselves maybe. Some people will go that far in their justifications. Dawn imagines the three faces that are not on that billboard. The three faces that may or may not be known by someone who's too afraid or apathetic to talk, by authorities who don't care or can't act or bungled the investigation or waited too long. Three missing women, three people that are responsible for making them disappear. For everyone damaged, a damager. When Dawn was 9 years old, there was a man caught in the city who destroyed numerous lives. He was charged with the murder of three women who'd all been reported missing over the last few years. All three families of the missing women said the police didn't seem to be actively investigating the disappearances. There were no front page headlines about the women while they were missing. Their families were not asked to give press conferences pleading for safe returns. Only after he was caught were the three women front page news, and only then because of what he did to them. The newspaper always led with a glaring headline, and Dawn would watch Violet, that's Dawn's mom, flip over the paper as she drifted through the kitchen. Violet refused to read the news stories or watch them on TV, changing the channel whenever the man's dead-eyed mugshot or the photos of the women, forever frozen in time, appeared on the screen. Even back then, Dawn understood that her mother lived in fear of seeing a face she knew on the news one day, or receiving a call from someone who hadn't phoned in decades, only to bring unbearable news. When Dawn was younger, Violet told her once that she hadn't seen her own mother for 25 years, and they all knew that she had a rift with her sister from before her children even existed. Dawn never met her mother's mother, not even when she was little, and Violet's family had sometimes been around. All the things Violet would never say, all the hurt she couldn't name and couldn't face, kept Dawn's mother from the world, kept her separate. She seemed to her children like a woman divested from herself, adrift and strange. They knew so little of her in the end. But then again, they did know the precise way her voice sounded, and the way her brow furrowed when she concentrated, the way her tongue flipped out to lick her lips. They knew the way she smelled, mineral and cool and like soap. Surely that counted for something. Dawn always knew that Violet loved her husband and her children fiercely, if distantly, but she also knew that Violet would walk away from the things she couldn't bear to see, from the things she'd already seen too many times. So Dawn watched her mom flip over the newspapers, but Dawn read the stories. She learned that the man would wait until a storm hit, increasing the odds of a woman accepting his offer of a ride. He further increased those odds by bringing along his small son, whose presence must have reassured the women that he was a good, wholesome father, that they would be safe with him. Pale eyes behind glasses scanned the sidewalks and corners. Stubby fingers, wet and shiny and clearly visible, flicked restlessly through radio stations. Snippets of pop songs cut off abruptly. And in the back seat, a little boy, bored, kicked his legs in the air and asked his dad what they were doing. Wheels rolled and rolled. Rain smacked the pavement. Wheels rolled gently to a stop. The man was caught on a summer night when the neighbor's insomniac son stepped on the back porch to smoke a joint at 3 a.m. He heard the man digging under the big maple tree in his backyard and saw a big shape in the dark that didn't look right. He dropped the joint, went inside, and called the police. The perpetrator was a longtime manager at a local pharmacy. He'd been married to his high school sweetheart for 12 years. An ordinary man, by all accounts. The evening news covered the story for a week, replaying the same interviews with a handful of friends, co-workers, neighbors. They all expressed shock, stressed how there were no signs of anything amiss. They all said he was such a great guy. Great guy. Dawn grew tired of the news anchors who shook their heads solemnly and said, "It's such an unbelievable story," and then introduced the next segment. Talked about a fundraiser for veterans and an upcoming agricultural fair, celebrated the 25th anniversary of a family-owned diner downtown. Then they did it again the next night until the women's story was dropped from the rotation. Of course, it wasn't really their story, and that was perhaps the final cruel twist. It was his story. He'd written them into his terrible narrative and then ended theirs, a particularly human barbarism. The interest of the general population waned and let go, if it had ever been peaked to begin with, quickly swallowed up by the pall of indifference that hung over the city. These women weren't the right kind of women for the type of victimhood that inspired Dateline episodes and countless threads on Reddit. Strangers weren't haunted by the case. In fact, the rest of the country barely picked up the story. There were a few scattered national news reports and articles in the days immediately after the arrest, and then there was nothing. If he was remembered at all, the man would quickly become something other than a man. A beast, a monster, a devil. But the names would all mean the same thing, not human. Not just not like us, but not of us. In other words, not our problem. An abhorrent anomaly that couldn't have been foreseen. Unfixable, so why bother trying? Best not to look at it too closely. What was so confounding about the fact of an ordinary man's violence? So many people needed monsters to look monstrous. They couldn't accept, despite all the evidence to the contrary, that the demons looked just like them. That a seemingly regular life could conceal a deeply vicious soul. The women's purses and shoes were found in a cardboard box with mold growing along the waterlogged flap shoved to the back of the garage. It wasn't particularly well hidden for the years it sat there, collecting rain runoff and dust. The man's wife later said she didn't notice the box or its contents. She rarely even entered the garage. That's his space, she said. The son was whisked away by his mother quickly and quietly to her hometown in British Columbia, and there was nothing more reported about him. Dawn wondered what the boy looked like, but there were no photos of him because he was 5 years old when his father committed his crimes with him in the backseat. She wasn't interested in the color of his hair or how his body was built. She was curious to know what expression could be read in his eyes. She could only ever imagine a vaguely defined little boy, a smudge of brown hair over a pale face, with eyes stunned into blankness. And within that vacuum, what would take hold? She knew already by then that absence was not the presence of nothing. It was the phantom presence of someone who had gone, or had been taken. Absence begets absence. A life was taken, and those left behind were taken from too. The shockwaves reached out and out and out until everyone was unsteady on their feet. Dawn thought that surely everyone in this city should be quaking, struggling to keep their footing. She started to resent those who could still walk steady here, and that resentment took hold in her, wormed its way deep inside